Welcome back to CTN. I'm your host, Robert Van Slitten. Universal apps. Let's get started. Now, as you probably already know, an iPhone app can run on an iPad. An iPad app cannot run on an iPhone. And a universal app is a single binary that can run on both an iPhone and an iPad. The question we're going to address in this episode is what happens when you select universal when you create a project. Before we jump into Xcode, I'm going to do a quick demo of the application that we're going to be looking at. I have the iPhone simulator running, and I have a very simple application called Universal. If I run this, it simply just tells me I'm an iPhone. It's a label, and yes, I did mess around with the font size. If I go to Home, and I change the device to an iPad, let it start up here. And I run the same app. It's a single binary. It tells me it's an iPad. Let's go over to Xcode and I'll show you how this works. Alright, let's begin by taking a look at file navigation. You'll note that there's two separate storyboards for iPad and iPhone. In other words, the interface designs are separate from each other. One view controller is created. The implication of that is you need a mechanism to determine which device you're actually running on. If you go over to the center portion, you'll notice that devices is universal. And there's a selector switch here which controls what you're looking at beneath those switches. The first item is what storyboard is being used. And there's the checkboxes for the rotations. Now if I go over and take a look at the asset catalog, we'll note that there's additional items for icons. So we have both the iPhone and the iPad, and additionals for the launch images. Now it is possible, if you start out with an iPhone or just an iPad project, you could change it into a universal. However, you have to do some of this setup yourself manually. I'll also point out that in complicated situations you could potentially have separate view controllers to support the two different storyboards. Let's go over to the next slide and we'll take a look at the code for this application. As I mentioned earlier, there's two different storyboards. There's one for the phone, one for the iPad. The one displayed on the left-hand side is the one for the phone. I put a label in both of them, defaulted to with question marks, and yes, I did up the fonts. There's one viewcontroller.m file, and in that, from the two different storyboards, I've created two different outlets, one for the phone label and one for the pad label. Now as far as code goes, since I want to display a different string for the two different devices, the basic question is how do I determine which device I'm running on? Creating a variable here called iPad, it's a bold type, And I'm accessing a device object. There's a class UIDevice, and there's a singleton device object. I get access to that by sending the message to the class current device. Now that object has a property called user interface idiom, and that property is one of two items in an enumeration list, one for the pad and one for the phone. So I'm testing for pad, user interface idiom pad. So I'm going to end up with a yes if it's an iPad and no if it's a phone. There's a comment here. I'd say could use macro UI user interface idiom. This portion where I simply access the property could be replaced with this macro. I prefer to use this because it's clearer as to what's being invoked on what. I do a simple if test on the iPad variable, and then all I'm doing is I'm setting the value of the label. Self.padLabel.text if it's a pad equals this string. I am an iPad. Else it's a phone, so I do this. And that's all there is to it. Let's close out. The app is on the website. Thanks for watching.